Houston, we see you on a stereo.
Conspiracy, lies, truth, helping you understand the lies of the world and see the truth of the Bible. Welcome to Celebrate Truth with your hosts, Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate.
We're talking about Question Everything. I don't know about you, but I was super exhausted when I got home late on Monday. And I think you and we flew out. You were, I think, at around 11 or 12, I think. And I flew out around 4
it was
or
like
5.
1:30. I think it was 1:30, if I remember right.
It was about 1:30 is when you flew out, right? Yeah, because I flew out about 4. And like I said, when I got home, I was pretty exhausted. I was running around, not just with the conference and speaking, but also, shooting a lot of interviews for my new documentary that I'm hopefully looking to come out at the end of the year, most likely the fall of 2019. That's what I'm shooting for. But anyways, awesome. I wanted to do this show about just everything that happened at Question Everything 2019. Joe and his wife did a fantastic job. Thanks again for everything that was provided. I think they did a class act when it came to everything that was provided, right down to even the food. But we can talk a little bit more about that getting into it. But before we do, just want to mention if there's anything new with you since you got back from Question Everything in your Belinda, California.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm doing, weekly uploads, whether that's sermons that I'm uploading to my YouTube channel. Just before the conference, I did upload my latest biblical cosmology video. I think that's the 4th one that I've done in my series on biblical creation. And that had to do with creation and our human perception and how things match up with Scripture. I mean, what we can see with our eyes, what we can perceive in the world around us certainly matches up with the Word of God. And I still have plans to add my next my next video in the Dear Church series, just looking at things pertaining to leadership in the church and just the inner workings of the church and how we can improve on that. And I do highlight some of the, some of the things that I think are lacking in a lot of churches in America and around the world. But I always share Scripture and some things that I think we can do to improve as well. This week, let's see. So this coming week on Monday, I will be on Disputed Lands with Chad Schaefer, which is now airing just about weekly on Take on the World TV, which is their new YouTube channel. And then on the 11th, Monday the 11th, I will be interviewed on Patricia Steer's show on that Monday. So exciting, the next few weeks. I have some interviews and shows to do with folks. So very much looking forward to that. I think awesome. I've been trying to get on Chad's show for a while, and he had some switching around and then of course he wanted to have me Monday. He texted me Monday, and I'm like, dude, I said I'm still going to be. I'll be driving back from the Detroit airport. So he was able to have Doug Krieger on, which I understand was a really good show. So looking forward to Monday. And he was joking around telling me that, it only took 6 months to get you on the show.
Yeah. Well, he'll be joking as well, too, because he's been going back and forth saying, I really need to get you on the show. We actually had talked about that last year at, Take on the World. And, once in a while he'll pop in. He's like, I really need to get you on the show. So it's great. I know he's busy. He's doing a lot of great stuff, but also, with Patricia, Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. Yes. Interesting enough, that was my very, very first show, my first interview. She was the first one to interview me. I think it was episode 56. I think she's in like 280 or something like that right now. Wow. But I think it's episode 56, if I'm not mistaken. But it was fantastic. I knew that, the majority of our audience, weren't Bible believers and stuff. So, I went on there. But even with the response and the comments, it seemed like it went over really, really well. And from then on, Patricia and I, we forged a great friendship, and we've been friends for years now. And it was really amazing to spend time with her at Question Everything, along with Mark and, Mark Sargent and Matt Long and all the different various speakers, right? There was Paul on the Plane, Chad Taylor. There was just so many amazing people, Jared Kretzmann. And we're going to be talking about each one of them kind of going into their presentations. Now, I know that, you caught quite a bit. I was pretty busy if I wasn't speaking or trying to catch some, presentations, I was doing a lot of interviews for my new project, including yourself, that we got in right at the very end. And we'll talk a little bit about that because, like I said, I think it was right down to the wire. I think we wrapped up that shoot with you, I think at about 12:30.
Yeah, it was like almost 1 a.m.
It was about 1 a.m., I think. And it was like, hey, good night. And then next thing I know, we're down there having breakfast and then you're gone. So it was a hectic schedule. It was amazing. So many great reports coming out from Question Everything. And like I said, just the diversity of topics, and also just to be able to present not just the gospel once, but 2 really powerful gospel presentations at the end, which we'll get into in hour 2. But before I get into it, I just wanted to mention that with Question Everything, the conference itself the digital download is going to be coming out here soon, probably in the next week or so. You can go to QE2019.com for more information on that. Strongly suggest that you do. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. They're putting a lot of work into it. It's going to be really awesome to have it all, put together and packaged that way. But opening up with Matt Long, he basically kicked things off with the reliability. Can you trust the Bible? And what were your thoughts on that as after Joe had given the welcome and then Matt kicked it off? I just wanted to see kind of what your opinion was on how everything kind of set the tone for the rest of the conference, the remaining 2 days.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I thought Matt did a very good job of highlighting some of the key points when you look at the reliability of Scripture. He began talking about the manuscript evidence that we have for the Bible, and he did a really great job of showing a visual comparison. Most of us are fairly visually oriented, and he compared, I think he had a chart, and it had all these little dots on it, and it looked like about 95% of all of these dots on the chart had to do with the mountain of manuscript evidence for the Scriptures. And then he had 2 other fields on there. He had, I think it was Homer's Iliad and some of the writings of Plato. And he showed very clearly, I think the Iliad had something like around 15 or 16 manuscripts, and some of Plato's stuff had some like 9 copies or 8 copies. And so it was just, it was powerful to see that visual, to see that those different colors of dots on the presentation were just so tiny. I mean, they almost weren't there, they almost didn't matter at all. Mm-hmm. And he made some great points about how people will look at writings of antiquity and around the time of the Bible. And, he spoke about Alexander the Great, and that none of those original manuscripts are available, but the copies, the amount of copies were so small compared to the Scriptures. And he even spoke about how, just when we look at the writings of the quote unquote early church fathers, we have like about 95% of all verses are present. We could put together almost a complete Bible just from the quotations of Scripture within just the fathers there. So I thought he did a really great job, and he not only tackled can we trust the Bible and the evidence for that, but he also spoke about the historicity of Jesus Christ himself. And I appreciated how he spent several minutes quoting from not only non-Christian sources, but anti-Christian sources, speaking about, Jesus as an individual, speaking about the practices of the early church. And I thought Matt did a fantastic job. Normally the preachers end up, talking about that kind of stuff. But I think it just goes to show you that any believer that puts the time in can find this evidence, fairly easily. And I won't name names, but, there at every conference you have, obviously you're going to have a lot of believers, right? But you're also going to have some who are maybe agnostic, not really sure what's going on, and some that would qualify themselves as atheists. And even within the speakers list, I think we had maybe 1 or 2 atheists, but one of them had made the comment after Matt's lesson that, wow, he really gave me some good things to think about regarding the Bible. And so I thought, wow, this is awesome. It's not just the listeners, not just the attendees that are were treated to a really great talk, but even some of the other speakers had positive points to share. And so I thought that said a lot about Matt's professionalism, his heart, how he came across. And so I thought it was great to open up the conference.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of truthers are people that really they're invested and they really do want to determine truth, are skeptical by nature. So to me, that type of information is so crucial. I mean, it was for me. If it wasn't for the great apologetics ministries and just all of the research that I did short time, after I got saved, I struggled with a lot of doubt, and it was almost like God wanted me to fight for Him. That's what I got, because I remember we used to pray, just like all these doubts, please just take them away, and they came out harder and more furious. But for me, it was really important to see that you can prove. It's not just a belief system. It's not just, I believe in Jesus or I believe in these accounts. You can prove these things when you do that investigation, right? I mean, there's great, like he had mentioned, Josh McDowell. I remember reading a lot of his material, but even into like Lee Strobel, right? A Case for Christ. I mean, these are the type of people that I would say are suited in the same regard, that they came to it from a very skeptical nature. Like, I want to research this out. Could I prove this in court? Could I prove the resurrection in court based on the evidence? And to me, it's really, really important, because so many people just, throw out their hands and say, I don't believe in this book, or, I don't know if I even believe in Jesus. Well, I mean, even historians that aren't even biblical in the sense that they even believe in the Bible support Jesus existing, right? So the whole notion of even saying that Jesus never even existed is silly. It's foolish. It's one thing if you don't like Jesus, but don't go so far as to say, he never existed, or it's a big figment of our imagination, just because you look at secular historians and there's enough evidence out there to support the fact that he did indeed walk the earth. The question is, what he claimed, is it true? And I implore everyone to go on that journey and find out, because like I said in my presentation, that really, if you come to the truth, that's fine and dandy. But if you don't really understand who the embodiment of truth was, who the way, the truth, and the life is, then really you don't have anything. You're halfway there almost, right? To be totally set free, the truth will set you free, and you're only free by Jesus. And that's something that I think people have a lot of hard time with when they understand this topic, or they try to grapple with it, is what is truly going on. But I thought Matt did a fantastic job really going in and showing, can we trust the Bible? Because pretty much everyone from that point on, especially the ones that were slanted more towards supporting the Bible and aligning with Christianity, obviously we're pointing to a lot of scriptures, including my presentation, which I'll get you to comment on, just because I can't really comment on my own presentation. But I followed Matt Long after he went and did his presentation. I followed it up with what is scientism, and maybe you can comment on what you gathered and what you got from that.
And feel free to fill in any important blanks that I might leave out. But one of the things I always appreciate about your presentations relating to scientism is you're not just sharing your personal thoughts or even just a definition and saying, hey, this is what scientism is and this is what true science is, but you always include scripture. And I don't know, I'm sure it was planned this way because you already had prepared your thoughts, but I thought that there were a lot of scriptures, as I recall, that really complemented, both of those talks complemented each other. And I thought that going, having the two of you go 1-2 at the start was really good. And, you often will quote from 1 Timothy 6:20, talking about avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. And I think that's such an important foundational scripture, because there is a lot of information out there today in the mainstream. And most of the highest lab coats out there, the ones at the top that really are nothing more than paid actors, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and such. But there's so much out there that is called science, but it really is false because it contradicts what the scriptures say. And, I always thought that, back in the day, probably when we were kids, it seems like students would do a lot more with the scientific method and, actual experiments. And I appreciate how, you say, look, I'm not against science, I'm against scientism, which, as you pointed out in your lesson, is really nothing more than a religion. And the force behind scientism is a satanic agenda. It is a false religion that the masses have kind of followed. And you really do a good job of pointing out that the agenda is ultimately to draw people away from the truth and the fact of the real creation. Because as you mentioned already, when we understand the true creation, and we come to that knowledge and that conviction of it as the truth, it begs the question then, well, okay, so if the creation is true and what the Bible says about creation is true, then I need to start asking some questions about the creator. Who is the creator? Mm-hmm. And when people dig further into that, they realize it wasn't just, God saying in the beginning, the Father saying, let there be light, but that the Spirit was involved. And ultimately, according to Colossians 1, Jesus Christ is the creator. There was nothing in the heavens and on earth that was made that was not made through him. So I mean, that part just never gets old to me, because you have done so much research. You do a really good job of explaining the difference between true science and, science falsely so-called, which has been termed scientism.
Sure. And so many people, believe that what they're believing in is true science, and really it's scientism. It's, theories of men. It's foolishness. I mean, according to the Bible. But it really is an attack. It's an agenda on the Most High. And you see this completely very evident in my presentation, but also a lot of people that have brought to light, just exposing it for what it is. And when you start, showing clips of them making fun of the crucifixion and saying the stars, thank the stars, instead of Jesus. And when you start seeing them, come against the Bible and making fun of it, you can see that that's kind of public enemy number one when it comes to, the science agenda. And a lot of people thought, well, no, it's a purely academic pursuit. It's not spiritual. And I think, in my presentation, I like to show people it's very spiritual in nature.
Yes.
And that's the deception. And it's masqueraded like a Trojan horse, where it comes in as something that's, has so much prestige, right? Put a white lab coat on and people will take you very seriously. Like, oh, wow, what do you have to say? It's that prestige that's there. And also the illusion that, well, we can't debate, we can't argue with science. Nothing can stand up to science. And while, technically that might be true to an extent, if it's true empirical science, I would say that I don't really see any true science being put forward anymore when it comes definitely to anything with the talking points in the media, when it comes to the origins, and whether or not, you think that some of these topics are way out there, like the fact that, whether it's biblical cosmology, flat earth, evolution for a lot of people in the church already, were crying foul, seeing the red flags in the proposed theories of evolution, right? There's so many problems. And again, going back to Matt a little bit, talking about, can we trust the Bible? Well, can you really trust the theories of men when it comes to things that are being put forward as scientific fact? Well, with evolution, if you really want to study the other side from credible sources, look into it. It's actually incredible what you're going to find. You're going to find not just missing links, you're going to see missing chasms of, gigantic sizes. There's just so many problems, not to mention the Piltdown Man, Lucy, all these hoaxes that were, perpetrated, and they were put into science textbooks, up until recently. Maybe they still exist. But the fact is they were never removed out of, children's curriculum. And yet these things were complete frauds. These were, people trying to actually bring this theory together based on a couple bones here and there. And you're seeing this with dinosaurs. You're seeing this all over the place, right? And, another show we can get into dinosaurs and evolution. But my point was that when you start looking around, everything is under attack when it comes to the created order of what God has established from the creation that we see.
You had a great slide on there, and it was very similar to something I remember as a kid. I think it was in maybe like around 1978. National Geographic came out with this hardback series, that had to do with science and evolution. And, they typically have we came from monkeys, and then you got the Neanderthals, and they have all these supposed, this picture, this image where you'll have like 8, figures all in a row. And I believe, if I remember right, you had a slide in there. And, the question is, what are you seeing here? And the answer is you're seeing a cartoon. That's really all it is you're just seeing an illustrator who put that on paper, put it on the internet. And the other thing about the connection between your lesson and Matt's is, as you pointed out as well, I think you mentioned it in the book as well, that people often try to reduce the Bible to just a book, or, at best, just another work of literature. Sure. And I thought that both you and Matt did a very good job of bringing out the fact that, look, this is a book of truth through and through, cover to cover. And I love the fact that when you look at Romans 1, you look at Psalm 19, verse 1, about the heavens declare the glory of God. And all of this is evident, Romans chapter 1, all of this is clearly seen, as the scriptures say. And then when we consider our own perception, it makes sense that if we are created by this amazing, powerful God, that he gave us certain senses so that we can confirm with our own eyes and with, things that we can see and experiments that we can do that aren't really that difficult, that we can confirm what he stated in his word. And so to me, I see, a connection there. I see congruity. And so I thought that was really great to have you two kind of kicking it off. And even though this wasn't a quote unquote Christian conference, obviously Joe and his wife Elisa are believers, and many of the speakers are believers. Many of the folks there attending are believers. There definitely was a strong showing of biblical truth, throughout the schedule. And I thought the beginning and the end were really powerful. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Like I said, it kicked off strong and definitely ended incredibly strong as well. So, yeah, no, it was fantastic. I felt very good about it. I was definitely a little disappointed that I was running over a little bit in time. I know that Jared Kretzmann was after me, and all of a sudden they were kind of flagging me, and I totally knew that I was running over a little bit. But you can't stop right there. You know what I mean? Yeah,
you gotta. I'm so close, but I can't go off the stage. I can't talk to him. I'm like 5, 10. I'm doing these. A couple people came up to me and they're like, I was mad. They were trying to get you off the stage. I wanted you to keep going. I'm like, no, it's not their fault. I definitely could see that it was running over a little bit, and you got to keep on time because things can get a little out of hand if you let things slide. But I was just like, I can't end it right now. I got to finish this up another 10 minutes. But
yeah, anyways. There was a couple of times where you were just really passionate. I mean, it's really cool to listen to you on a roll, because especially at the beginning of the conference when you have more energy, that probably helped you. For you and Matt both to be able to go and just full steam ahead. And then the rest of the conference, obviously you were very busy, doing the docuseries and listening to other speakers and fellowshipping. But I always think it's great. The first few speakers right out of the gate usually have a lot of energy because, you have all that anticipation,
Yeah, true. That's true.
But the way it all worked out, it's almost kind of like, oh man, did they plan it that way? Well, yeah, of sorts they planned, Joe obviously planned the schedule.
Joe did. Joe was kind of like, he wanted to kind of one up on each other, and he had it all formulated that way. I would say, everything would be to his credit as far as how he organized it. And really, honestly, whether I was second or I was second last, I still would bring a lot of passion. Sorry, I shouldn't say I would. Really, the Spirit speaks through me, and it kind of takes over in that sense. Because a lot of times I'll kind of go up like I'm doing this presentation, and then I'll just get on fire. You know what I mean? But that's not me. The words that come out of my mouth sometimes is just like, where did that come from? Right? I've had that in witnessing encounters. I've had that all through my life, which, so God gets the glory. I don't, not with my words. But, I felt very, very, blessed in that sense of being able to deliver that, knowing the audience. I know a lot more people are going to be, getting the digital download. And, I think it was historic. In the sense that a conference put together with all those topics, including flat earth, it had never been done before. And I know that Joe felt the need there in, Southern California. But really, in a sense, that is not just a Southern California thing. I think that's a worldwide thing. I really don't think any type of conference had ever been done approaching that many type of topics. And,
no, it was very unique. It was very unique.
It really was, yeah, and it was fantastic to be part of. Talking to other people that have passion or they've researched into other areas. But knowing quite a few of these speakers. I mean, obviously there were a few new ones, new faces. But getting into Jared Kretzmann that came up next. I mean, I had the opportunity to meet him in 2017 when I was shooting Scientism Exposed 2. And for people that are listening in, this is all brand new, and we're talking about these topics. Just so you know, with my presentations exposing scientism, I'm known not just for my documentary Scientism Exposed and Scientism Exposed 2. I just recently came out with my first book called Scientism Exposed, Hiding the True Creator of Creation. But you can find all of that, at my website, celebratetruth.org, or just go to YouTube, type in Scientism Exposed. You can watch my documentaries for free. But check it out, because it's important to know the difference between science and scientism. And when you understand the sinister nature behind scientism, you're never, ever going to look at science the same way again. If anything, you're going to be more critical minded, and you're going to start to test things the way we should have from the very start, because that's what science was all about, testing, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because what a lot of the proponents of scientism always accuse us of, those in this community. They will say, oh, they don't believe in science, but that's absolutely not true. And so I think it's great that you highlight the difference so that you can recognize, well, what is the difference? Because a lot of times folks in the flat earth community or the truther community at large are ridiculed and accused of not believing in empirical science. And that's just not the case. We love science.
Sure. Yeah. And I made that point also in the presentation, saying, hey, look, I love science. True science is a wonderful thing. I think it's here for a very specific reason. But like I said, there's very few things from climate change to vaccinations to, notice, and I mentioned this in the presentation, and that was definitely planned, because I knew that, 9/11 would be discussed. I knew vaccinations would be discussed, not so much climate change. But what I showed in that one slide is that science comes along as the validators for everything, right? And for the population, they get appeased by, oh, scientists say it's safe, therefore I'm going to vaccinate my kids. Oh, scientists said that fire melted steel and the buildings went down. The scientists already came in, and the engineers, and so again, science becomes the validator. I mean, so much so that now they're validating the fact that there's more than two genders. Science discovered there's 56 genders. That's all they have to say these days. And then people are like, well, science is always discovering new things. So I guess the whole time we had it wrong. We always thought it was just male and female, but now science says that there's 56 genders and counting, right? And everything's good. But my point is, science becomes the validator of everything. That's why I think the topic is so incredible. It's really critical, because so many people, trust, they believe in science, but everyone's worldview is shaped by science. Everyone. Doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter what walk of life, doesn't matter what country you're from. Every single person here, their worldview is shaped by science. So, but like I was saying before, when I got to meet Jared Kretzmann for Scientism Exposed 2, when we were shooting, it was really great. He was talking a lot about NASA and all these sort of things. And I know that Joe had brought him out so that when he came on after me, he really got into the sinister natures of the Nazis, because, as I briefly said in my presentation, a lot of people aren't aware that if you look at the humble beginnings of NASA, they were not so humble at all. There's a lot of really dark, sinister stuff going on, from Operation Paperclip, bringing Nazis over, with their rocket program, JPL, Jack Parsons, being, pretty much a full-on Satanist. Doing sex magic rituals. You have a lot of really suspicious stuff from the beginnings of NASA. But I thought, Jared's great to listen to. I love Jared. We had a great time. We were shuttling Justin and I back and forth. So really appreciate him as well too, because there's a couple times we needed some rides, and it was awesome for him to be able to, to spend time with Jared, because again, when we're at the conference, we're really busy. But maybe you can comment on basically I would say the deep levels of the Nazi occult spiritual worldview connection that he brought out at Question Everything 2019.
Oh yeah, I got to hear his talk, and you probably did too, at Take on the World 18. He did kind of, to use a German word, he did a bit of a blitzkrieg on the audience, because he packed about 4 hours worth of material. He could have done 4 or 5 sessions. and he packed it into 45 minutes. Now, obviously, it had been several months for QE since Take on the World 18, so he'd kind of refined some things and honed in on certain topics. And one of the things he mentioned was he helped us to understand, the German populace, the German people at this time. Most people don't realize especially with the leadership, they were so much into the occult, so much so that, things that would be considered way out of mainstream or just kind of almost like kooky, like mysterious and all those types of things, they would just take at face value, right? And they had some pretty fantastic beliefs and ideas about themselves and, about how they were trying to do this, this Aryan race, this, not just white when we say that, but it had to do also with, kind of this connection to a superior race in every way, including technology. And some people believe that maybe some of the German technology perhaps was linked to the occult and maybe even the fallen watcher angels. So I thought he did a really good job of just showing how the whole German culture was really, and I forget some of the German words he used to describe it, but he really showed their focus. And the leadership was trying to control that. He mentioned that if there were other people in the culture, in the community that had any types of talents in the occult, they would either try to absorb them in somehow, make them a servant of the Reich, or they would just kind of try to silence them, because it boiled down to control as well. They wanted to be the masters of this secret knowledge. And he did a masterful job of showing some quotes from different writers of philosophy books at the time, and even some of the ideals of Hitler. And again, he was a very passionate and well-studied guy. He's a young guy. I think he's still in his 30s, like maybe mid-30s, middle 30s. But this guy is an authority on a lot of the subjects that he speaks on, and he comes across as a seasoned, veteran. And because the whole Nazi thing was a huge interest of his, it made his presentation that much better. And a lot of times he would apologize and say, well, some of you might not get as excited as I am about this topic. But I think everybody was glued to what he was saying.
Oh, yeah.
And, he also mixed in some good humor, how he said his dad used to make him watch all these World War II, documentaries and videos when he was a kid. And so he was kind of a captive audience. But hey, you know what? God knows what his servants need, how he's going to help train them up for things he'll have them do down the road. And I'm sure looking back on it, he's like, yeah, as a kid, that probably frustrated him, but it really gave him a great knowledge base. And, he really did a good job of showing that connection to NASA. Most people probably think, oh, NASA was just, a bunch of Americans and, there was no occult, it's just pure, empirical science and people who care about truth and exploration and all of that, but couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah, he was actually the first person that we got interviewed for the documentary. Was Jared, and like I said, it was a year prior when we were doing the work with Justin in the same way. And that was when I had met Rob Skiba, Rick Hummer. That trip, I pretty much met everyone for the first time. And he was the one that kind of connected me with Joe Taylor. So if you're familiar with Scientism Exposed 2, he runs the Mount Blanco Fossil Museum, where he's done incredible work. Exposing the lies. Yeah, and exposing a lot of, all the lies when it comes to evolution, the fossil record, all these sort of things. I knew I wanted that to be a big part in the documentary, and it was great to meet Joe, and then also Aaron Judkins. And interesting enough, Jared Kretzmann will be speaking at Flat Earth International Conference in Dallas.
Nice.
So I haven't announced it yet officially. I'm going to be doing that as far as, posting it with social media. I'm just actually working on some promos for the big international conference that's coming up here in Dallas in the fall. And if you'd like more information on that, you can go to fe2019.com. But yeah, Jared Kretzmann is going to be there. Got a lot of other surprise guests that are going to be there, and it's going to be fun to announce them. But yeah, Jared has a way of explaining things quite like no one else, right? He comes with a lot of passion, and he's very well researched in many fields. I mean, his primary thing is satanic ritual abuse. He's been doing that with Tom for quite some time through The Black, and they do tremendous work, but also he's able to speak on many different topics, and it's a real pleasure knowing him, and, as a brother and also as a friend. So, yeah, but after, Jared was speaking, we got into, I believe, what was it? Was it Al that was next?
Yeah, Al Morenton.
Al Morenton.
He owns Movida Oils, Movida.
Yes. And funny story on that before we get into that, because this is the CBD, and his presentation was, is CBD safe? Well, what I will say is, I'm going to actually let Nate talk a little bit about this, because I missed this presentation. I'm looking forward to the digital download so I can check this out, because I can tell you it's not safe for Canada in Alberta, because when I went through customs, I asked them very quickly, hey, is this okay? No, it's not. They confiscated it and said probably in a couple of months, but right now it's still illegal. So I called my camera guy, because he was on another flight, and he was going through Calgary, and when he landed, I said, dude, you better say something. Don't get found, trying to bring this into the country. You'll get in a lot of trouble, because they told me when I brought it up, they said, well, it's a good thing you said something, right? Because we catch people that are, it's in their luggage. You can get a little bit of trouble. So I let Justin know, hey, you should just mention something. And he's in Calgary, right? Well, he mentions it. And because he put it in his checked baggage, they had to, he missed his flight. So he had to actually get an Airbnb and go the next day, because he missed the flight because they were trying to grab his bag. And I felt kind of bad, but also I was trying to help him, because they said that you could be in a lot more trouble. So is CBD safe bringing it from the U.S. to Canada or Alberta specifically? No. But hey, is CBD safe for consumption and for what Al presented? Let's hear from Pastor Nate.
Yeah, well, I knew it was okay in Ohio and California, and since I was originating in LA and flying into Michigan and then driving to Toledo area, I knew that those states were cool with CBD. So the funny thing is I always do the opt out, because I don't need any extra radiation.
Same here. I do it every single time. Yeah,
every single time. And so I got the pat down, and the funny thing is they didn't check my bag at all, and of course they wouldn't have had a problem with it. But so I had CBD oil. In fact, I had 2 of the CBD oils, because when we left the restaurant, a couple of people peeled out early, and one of them didn't grab their bottle, right? So I actually had 2 bottles of, I made it like a bandit on that deal. So I gave one to my daughter who has migraines often. And wouldn't you know, she was having a migraine the morning after I came back, and I said, hey, put some of this on your, forehead or whatever. And she did. And it actually helped her feel better. She was able to go to school, which normally when she gets a migraine, she'll start to get, sick, and she'll be, dry even in the bathroom. So I was very impressed. Time will tell, if there's a consistent benefit from that. But Al Morenton, he, even as a younger person, I think he's probably in his 50s now, maybe, I don't know. He's a pretty healthy dude. He's a former champion vegan bodybuilder as well. So he's definitely, knows a lot about health. And he started this company not just to help others, but really to help himself. And he started out talking about how he had this glaucoma and maybe some other degenerative eye disease, even, in his 30s. And he did his research, and he said that this CBD oil, and he takes dosages in pills, capsules, but he noticed that he was regaining a lot of his vision. And then when he would go off it, because I think he said one time he ran out of a supply, he thought he had extra supply, but those were just display bottles, empty bottles. And he said he regressed so quickly within 2 to 3 days that he was almost, again, legally blind. And so he has his own personal testimony. And, when you think about going blind and not being able to function, as a younger adult, as a middle, and even as a middle-aged adult, that affects your whole life. And so I thought he was very passionate to share and begin about that. And then he went into, some of the benefits of CBD oil. And of course, because of the government, if it's not big pharma, they don't want you, if it's not government regulated, they don't want you to make the statement that it can cure or heal anything. So, he gave a disclaimer, but He did also share, some testimonies from different people. In fact, I think it was on Facebook or something. Somebody was posting that if they purchased some CBD at, from Al's table at the conference, and within a few days they were back home and they were already feeling more energetic, and some of the health issues that they were having, they were able to stop. In fact, one of the gals said that she was on anti-anxiety medication, and she just stopped taking it because she felt so great. So I was pretty impressed. But yeah, he showed how it is safe. It doesn't have, the hallucinogenic THC in it. And so, but even though it doesn't have the THC, the government has tried to regulate a lot of that. And so, folks need to check in their states or their provinces, wherever they live. But I thought he did a pretty good job of explaining, what the potential benefits were. And, stuff is not cheap. And what I've heard, and I've seen this a lot on Facebook, you can get CBD from various sources, and you really should do your homework, because a lot of places it's kind of like getting watered down gas, at the pumps. Mm-hmm. It's just not as good. And his outfit, his group, Movita Oils, has a very high quality. And what I appreciate is I believe him that it's the highest quality, because he has to have the highest quality for his own vision and health. So he said that the stuff that he sells is exactly the same formula, potency, whatever you want to call it, as the stuff that he uses. And after meeting him in person, and as you know, he was at our Flat Earth meetup dinner. He was so impressed. He's not a flat earther, but he was so impressed with the evidence and the presentations that he actually came with questions. And thankfully,
Nathan Thompson was able to answer every one of them. I'm like, here's the guy, because he's like, hey, do you know anywhere I could go to, ask some questions? I'm like, here's the guy right now. Shoot. And he just was like, what about this? What about this? What about this? No, he seemed like he was really blown away by the presentations, right? And I'm sure, initially he thought, what? This is crazy. What? People believe in flat earth, How could it be so crazy? But that's the thing. I mean, most people, when they first hear those two words, they, roll their eyes and they think, well, how crazy. But yeah, Al really seemed very genuine in his pursuit to really research it and look into it. He's like, you know what? It really, does make sense. A lot of the stuff that you brought up, I briefly went into it in my presentation only because I knew that other people were going to be tackling it more head on. But really, whether it was Mark Sargent or other people we'll be talking about here in the second hour. But, it's one of those things where, I was explaining, I was talking to Bob from Globebusters a couple hours before the show, and we were talking about a bunch of stuff with the big documentary that's just hit Netflix. But love it or hate it, it's still generating a lot of interest. A lot of curious people are looking into the topic. He had mentioned that they had gone up 3,000 subscribers since it was released on Netflix. So, there's a lot of people curious, and, case in point, I came to a video making fun of it, didn't stop me. I created my channel, Celebrate Truth, on YouTube, and, I'm doing the Flat Earth International conferences. I mean, that guy that, was making fun of Flat Earth, never in his wildest dreams did he think that he would spur on the guy that would create the first International Flat Earth Conference. Yes. And then also, all the work that was done through Celebrate Truth, my documentaries, my book, and that's case in point. So, when the truth is out there, we shouldn't fear, anything as far as, laughter, ridicule, mocking. It doesn't really matter, right? It's like the intentions can be for evil, but God can turn them for good. So that's the amazing thing when we're talking about all these different topics. But yeah, going back to Al, it was really cool to get to know him. I didn't really have a chance to talk with him much at all at the conference. So it was nice that we were able to spend some time there. And actually, and we'll get into Daniel as well, that, talked about 9/11 and Building 7. He came out as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the second hour as well, as we'll get into the second day. We're pretty much talking about the first day of Question Everything 2019, which was Friday, February 22nd. And the digital download, I think you can pre-order it right now at QE2019.com. Check it out. It's a great way to support everyone. All the people that we're talking about, all the money goes into supporting all the great content creators that are out there, doing what they're doing as far as the truth and getting the message out. So So what would you say kind of for you was the highlight of the first day when it came to just the presentations? And it doesn't need to be a person, but it could have been something spoken. It could have been how something was, brought up. I just thought I would ask you what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you go, of course, for the presentations and the speakers. That's a big part of it. And I thought that the first day was very good, and I enjoyed how it kicked off with the first couple of speakers, and how it definitely shared. There's a love of the truth for the Bible, for the Word of God. But I also, every conference, as has kind of its own unique flavors. The kind of people that are there, the flow of things, the types of subjects that are covered. I really enjoyed just being in California. Now, I didn't think I would say that, because like with all the stuff that's happened in California, like honestly, the last place in the U.S. I would typically want to go is California. So I really enjoyed it. The weather, as you know, was cold that first night.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 40 degrees, man.
I didn't care. I came from like minus 20. So that it could have been 40 the whole time, and I would have had a big smile on my face.
Well, I just enjoyed the atmosphere. And the people, I would say a good chunk of the attendees were Californians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for that first day, I was running into people that I'm friends with on Facebook that I'd never met in person. At least one of my mods from my YouTube channel, FiredforTruth, Crystal Lane, she was there with her husband, Jerry. Got to, I talk with her a lot, through text messages and Facebook and all that. And I was just excited, to meet some of these folks in person that I have been, building a friendship with and having regular conversations with for several months. And then some of our other friends, mutual friends that live far away also showed up. You had Colin Pyle, who's, he's a Marine. And he came.
Eric came.
Eric Woodard. Yeah, Eric Woodard and his buddy Manny came from El Paso, Texas. So it was kind of the perfect fellowship for me, because obviously being friends with you and other speakers, having met some of the folks from social media that, I'd never met in person. And then some of the other friends, like Eric and Colin and some of these folks that, you just saw them a few months ago, or actually Eric wasn't able to make it to Denver. So it had been since Skyfall since I had seen Eric. And so obviously for me, I'm a people person. The relationships are really important. So aside from the great lineup and content, I really was just kind of soaking it in there in California, saying, man, this is really cool. There's so many neat people here. And as you know, California has kind of its own, flavor. And a lot of those Californians, they were so excited to have a conference there in their neck of the woods, because, whereas some of us might say, oh, man, I wouldn't want to go to California. There's earthquakes and fires and all this stuff. But they're like, hey, we don't want to leave California, man. Like, bring us some more conferences,
Mm-hmm.
So kind of funny. But I think the fellowship is super important. And, like you said, there was just quite a collection of amazing people at this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. There was just so much going on, and just some incredible presentations in the community. And that's a big thing with conferences, is just the networking, right? Is the community, hanging out, getting to meet people face to face. That to me seems to be always the highlight for most people. It's like, wow, we get to be around like-minded people. I don't feel judged, right? I don't feel like, I can't say what's on my mind without people looking at me in a really weird way, that type of thing. So it's really important for most people to have that feeling. That's why conferences are so good for that, right?
For sure.
I always encourage people, if you have a chance, get out and go to, a conference, especially if you know a lot of people online and you've never met them. It can be a very lonely life if you're just kind of sitting on your computer talking with people. And here's an opportunity to meet a lot of people, not just the great presenters or the speakers that you've been watching on YouTube videos or through podcasts. I mean, this is a great way to mingle and get to know people on a personal level, right? And I think that's really important. I mean, is that what you gathered with a lot of people that got to meet you for the first time?
Yeah. And some people, they feel so isolated, but when you go to these conferences, you meet people that are from your home state. In fact, several people, they're like, oh, you're only 30 minutes from me. I never knew there was any flat earthers or truthers, anywhere near me. So it is quite a blessing to be able to go to these conferences. And I know there's some cost involved, but you know what? We spend money on so many things. We'll take trips. We'll spend hundreds of dollars to go, for a couple hours to a baseball game or a football game. We'll spend all kinds of money on hobbies and collections that we have. Why not invest, once or twice a year to travel? And you know what? I mean, there was a lot of couples that came. There was even some teenagers at the event, which I thought was cool. Crystal brought her 13-year-old granddaughter who's been researching stuff on her own and wanted to come. So, all these great speakers. And, I wanted to mention, too, the last speaker on day one, Christina. Christina Hildebrand. She wasn't able to come in person because she had kind of a last minute or like a quick family emergency that came upon her. And so she couldn't be in person, but she was able to submit a video. And I was kind of in and out at that point because I had some folks that were saying, hey, Nate, can I talk to you for a minute? So I was doing some fellowship there in ministry. But from what the little parts that I did catch, it looked like a very good presentation, eye-opening presentation. She knows her stuff. And there's a reason why, Joe selected her for this topic. And it's, as you know, vaccinations are a huge, huge topic today. So, if you weren't there in person to listen to that full session, get the download. And honestly, just even if you paid for the download and only watched 2 or 3 of your favorite, topics here, most interesting topics, it's going to be well worth it.
Yeah, sure. The digital download, I think the pre-order is like $10, right? So really good, value. Also, it helps to support everyone. So that's it's good that you brought up Christina. Yeah, because vaccinations are a huge hot button topic when it comes to truthers and looking at all the research that was done. I mean, my wife and I and a few friends, we went to the premiere of Vaxxed. When it came to the city, we watched that in the theater at a theater here in my city. And it was amazing. I mean, it was one of those more, it was not like a mainstream theater. It was more, those theaters. But it was funny because part of the agreement was that the government had all these pamphlets in there. So when you went into the movie, there's this table set up about vaccination safety and all that. Is it safe? But they actually were only allowed to screen the movie in the city if the government could have a table, and I mean, there was nobody there. There wasn't like a representation for the government, but they had a whole table set up on vaccinations. Wow. So while you went to the movie, there's this big table on vaccinations with all this government literature. I just thought it was funny. It's like damage control. It's like, in the future, I'll be putting on the Flat Earth International Conference and the government will, say we have to be able to have NASA table, there and people, can be educated properly because it seems like, they're in damage control for sure. You bring them, they bring this up all the time about vaccinations, about 9/11 and other topics we're going to get into here in the second hour. But it seems like they constantly do not want people researching for themselves, finding and digging for the truth, right? They want to show through authoritative pieces or places or even people that they have the answers and you dare question, what we're telling you. And, it seems to me like whether it's the social media giants, they're ramping it up more and more. But we're going to be going into hour 2. So we're going to get into a lot that happened on day 2 right after these messages.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey, welcome back to Celebrate Truth Radio. This is hour 2 of episode 9. I'm joined with Pastor Nate Wolfe. We're doing a recap of Question Everything 2019. In the first hour, We went over the first day, and now we're going to be going through day 2, which was action-packed because it went right from the morning to the evening, where the first day went from the afternoon to the evening. So where do we begin on this one? I think the first speaker was Emily Pittsburgh, right? Correct? That was the first one, and she was going into Are We Born That Way? What did you get from that one?
Yeah, I thought she was very well prepared. And again, just another informed and passionate speaker. This subject hits close to home because her daughter is really, I guess, kind of a well-known person, or at least well-connected person to the whole transgender movement. She personally has connections with Hillary Clinton and some other people in that arena. So, she's often, shared little bits of information on that. And she herself was a victim of satanic ritual abuse when she was younger. So she has quite an experience with some of these things and made some great connections. But she's also shared in her talk about how the culture is indoctrinating us and indoctrinating our children. She went into some good presentations about indoctrination through Disney and other cultural phenomenons. The movie industry, and she talked about how the media, steers our culture in that direction. And so she was saying, look, there has not been found to be a gay gene. That was one of the things as we talk about scientism at the beginning.
Correct.
So many theories and things that scientists now know this, it's not even true. They put that out there that we found a gay gene. Well, that was proven that they weren't able to do that. And, she was very direct and assertive and knowledgeable, but she was also very compassionate. She didn't come across as some, angry activist or anything like that. She really has a heart for folks that are struggling with same-sex attraction and who are kind of just caught up in this sea of confusion and destruction, known as transgenderism. So I thought she did a very good job of tackling, a very sensitive and emotional subject. And she, of course, is a believer herself. So she shared some verses from Scripture about the creation and about, humans being created male and female. She shared scriptures about how, these acts that are being committed today and this whole movement of transgenderism goes against what the Creator intended and created us for. And so I thought she was very bold. She may have had the most difficult subject to speak on in California of all places, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for her. And I've gotten to know her personally, since Take on the World 18, just conversations, through text messages and Facebook, and seeing her all over the place on YouTube. She's everywhere. But that was my impression, was that she was very well prepared. She has a heart for her listeners, and she was bold but fair and compassionate. And I thought that she had a lot of guts, to tackle that subject. And I thought she did a very good job.
Yeah, I said to her, for many years I've seen the agenda being pushed when it came to the sexuality, the LGBT, homosexuality, even from Hay in the 1970s, he laid out exactly how they were going to do it through Hollywood and the media. And like I said, it's hard pressed to find a show right now where they don't bring in a homosexual couple or a lesbian couple. I mean, it's just rampant. You can kind of clearly see that they're, putting that in everything that we consume. But I said to her, I never saw the gender thing coming. Did you? And she says, no. To me, that was one area where I was just blindsided by,
Yes.
You could kind of follow the depravity. You could kind of see this tracking, and you could kind of follow the fact that I remember 20 years ago, I was telling people that, one day in your lifetime, you're going to see, bestiality being, okay. And they're like, no, never in a million years. And I said, you watch, because the first thing they'll do is they'll introduce it in comedy. And this is what they do. You can look back. You can track it back to Three's Company, when Jack was pretending to be gay.
Yes.
If you look at it, they always introduce it through comedy, get people laughing. It kind of, brings down that defensive mechanism.
Yeah.
There's a reason why they do it. But never did I ever see people questioning their own gender. It's one thing, when it came to sexuality, and that's a whole other discussion, but really gender. And it just shows you that Satan is not content unless he literally attacks every single, point when it comes to God's created order, his creation. Yes. Everything is up for grabs, including a very, very simple concept that everyone have known from the beginning of time, male and female. I mean, it's just so elementary, but yet now it's confusing. It's like, well, wait a minute. No, maybe not. Maybe there's more than two genders.
Yeah, and she really tied in as well. I think that she mentioned with vaccines, she had a short little bit there about vaccinations and how, there's various levels of human DNA in there, and how she was saying that even the children are getting DNA from the opposite sexes. And so, it's not just, although she did a masterful job of showing the culture, the indoctrination, the frog in the kettle analogy, but she believes that there's some elements of vaccinations that also, on a physiological level have contributed to that. And, you brought up Three's Company. I remember the show, Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks.
Yep,
I mean, all of these shows, sometimes they would dress up, you had, you had all these, shows, Robin Williams, he's been in some different movies, and, that
I think every comedian has dressed up as a woman at some point, right? And and again, you can get into
Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah. Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah.
And you got, is it Tyler Perry, and all of his series, and, and the interesting thing is, he's touted as a Christian, right? But you look at, the series that he has where he dresses up as this, female. He's got multiple movies, and even Christians eat that up. It's just a big ha 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 ha, so funny. And she, so she covered a lot of ground in one session. And of course, she lamented. She's like, "Hey, I got a lot more material here." She's like, "I have to condense this down and give you what I think is the most important, things, the most obvious things that I can show you that you can see for yourself."
Well, there's massive power. There's massive power in Hollywood, and so much so. Case in point, Dave Chappelle went on to Oprah. He went on to a couple of shows talking about how they were forcing him to wear a dress. Yeah. And he said, "Listen, man, I'm not wearing a dress. You're not going to, I'm not, come on, Dave, it was going to be funny. It'll be really funny." He's like, "Listen, man, I'm not wearing a dress." He went off big time on the fact that he wasn't going to wear a dress. Yeah. Well, I think it was 5 or 7 years later, they had him wearing a dress.
Yeah.
So here's a guy outspoken saying that no one's going to get me in a dress, right? I understand there's an agenda because they're trying to get every black guy in a dress. And he saw that. He was disgusted by it, right? He said, this is how they demean people. But yet what the craziest thing is, eventually they got him, right?
Yeah.
So, if they want to push this to the mainstream, they want to do this. This is what they're going to do. And it's really, really sad. But we can see this, like I said, tracing it back to bosom buddies. That's funny. That's really, really dating us. That's really dating us.
I know, man. We're solidly in that middle age category now. So
we really are, eh? We really are. I know it's funny.
A few more years, we'll be, pushing down the other side of that hill.
I'm going to be over the hill in a few years. Yeah, in a few years.
You'll be a year ahead of me. So
that's right. I'll let you know how it is.
Okay, great.
I'll be like, hey, it's not so bad going over the hill here. I think what is it? The big 5-0? Is that going over the hill? Something like that. But anyways, we definitely are keeping up with the times, and and again, who knows what's going to happen, by that time. I just read an article today that I think it was New Jersey or New York, the public school system just put into law that they're now going to teach LGBT history in the schooling system. And I'm thinking, really? Like, what for? It's so crazy. Someone actually posted on Facebook. They said, what, are they going to start with Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of funny. Yeah. Anyways, it was just kind of funny.
And the thing is that when people say we're going to do the history on this and the history on that, that should be a red flag, right? Because there's a lot of so-called history that has been kind of manufactured and kind of backwards engineered, right? To show, oh no, this has been around a lot longer. And of course, we do know that homosexuality has been around a very long time. Sure. But like you said, they're often They're often flubbing their numbers on the percentage, of people. And because like you mentioned, you see all of these, every show, every sitcom, every movie has their, homosexual or even transgender representatives.
Sure.
That it seems like it's a much larger cross section of the culture. You would almost think there's 30 or 40%. But, it might be a little bit more than that now just because of all the confusion.
It's still not that high. It's still not that high.
It's like 4 or 5%, I think, is probably closer to accurate. So it's not even near 10% of the actual population. Now, I tell you where there's the percentage is growing is my wife is a master's level social worker and private practice counselor, and she can verify that so many younger kids and young people are very confused, because of the culture, because it's an indoctrination. And
you need to get her on the show sometime.
Yeah. She could say, she could share a lot more than I could on that subject, but a lot of counselors today are seeing the issues, the emotional trauma and things that are happening because of the confusion and because of what's being, pushed in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of confusion going on, especially with that topic. And then I think for most people, though, when they really started waking up to a lot of lies of the government and just the world system was, the next speaker that came up on day 2, which was Daniel Noel, right? And talking about 9/11. I mean, for me, that was a huge pivotal point in my life. And specifically what he talked about with World Trade Center Building 7, which to many people, they really don't realize that it wasn't 2 buildings that came down that day. There were 3. And the third one is so mysterious that there was no structural damage, no planes hit it. And yet at free fall speed, like I think 5 o'clock in the evening, it just came down at free fall speed, like a controlled demolition. But maybe you can comment a little bit about Daniel's presentation, especially with 9/11, which I'm sure a lot of people even listening in right now, especially with Revolution Radio and a lot of different programs, people have touched on this topic because I think they went a little too far. There was just too much. And talk about the amount of evidence to support the fact of, questioning the official report. When you got passports coming out of the plane and there was just so much. It was like this mountain of evidence. It's the same thing when it comes to, enclosed cosmology or flat Earth. When you look at the mounds and mounds of evidence to support the fact that we're not on a spinning ball flying through space, in the same regard, 9/11 has so much compelling evidence. I always say, look, I don't know 100% what truly the story is or how it happened, but I know what didn't happen. And it wasn't hijackers on 4 planes. I mean, you look at the Pentagon, for goodness sakes, or even Pennsylvania, there's a hole in the ground. There's not even a fuselage or wings or anything, and yet people eat this up and say, this is it, because the media and mainstream news says, here's the report. But anyways, maybe you can comment a bit more on the presentation on Building 7 and 9/11.
Yeah, and that was one of the presentations where I had some side conversations with folks that needed to talk to me. So I didn't get to see all of it, but the parts that I saw, I was pretty impressed with his research, and he was very good at using repetition to get the message across, because he showed the image of Building 7 collapsing, several hours later, which had nothing to do with, the supposed planes or whatever relating to the tower. But he showed how it fell down, and he showed it over and over and over that it appeared to be a controlled demolition. Then he showed several clips repeatedly of actual controlled demolitions of buildings that were of a similar size and structure. And I thought that was powerful, because he's like, look, okay, here it is again. Here's Building 7, and then here's this other building that was a controlled demolition. Here's another building that was a controlled demolition. And there was no noticeable differences. I mean, it was such a complete match. And if I remember right in his presentation, he said that one of the narratives on that was that it had to do with, basically office furniture that caught on fire. And I'm like, he stressed that point because it's such a ludicrous point to say, oh no, it was due to structural damage that happened because of the massive quantities of office
no buildings
furniture.
fall because of fire. No buildings fall. And then you get into sprinkler systems, you get into all sorts of things. But that building was massive. I mean, everyone kind of concentrates on the Twin Towers. But if you just take building 7, I mean, I don't think in my city there is any building that is to that level. It's a huge, massive building. I mean, these things were built with steel. It does not melt with, jet fuel, or fires. A simple fire.
And you watch how fast it came down.
Oh, free fall speed.
There's no way that, all of a sudden, all the furniture combusted all at the same time in this massive, it's just ludicrous. And so he did a really good job of picking apart, some of that, quote, official narrative. I think he also mentioned, the financial connection to the owner. And if I remember right, the owner of the Twin Towers was also the holder of Building 7. Yeah. And so it was quite interesting when he went into some of the financial gain through insurance, that was claimed for those buildings. I mean, it's just hokey. And aside from Daniel's presentation, I'm sure he mentioned this as well, but I remember when I started getting into conspiracy, quote, theories, and 9/11 was one of the first ones that I got into, in addition to the Kennedy assassination and the supposed moon landing. But I remember watching some video clips because it appeared that there was a consistent planned narrative by the main media stations, because there was at least one station that announced that the Building 7 fell before it actually fell.
Yeah, I think it was BBC or something, but
that tells you. I mean, it was one of the major networks, and so that tells you that this was a planned, situation, and somebody dropped the ball there, with their timing. Like they're talking about Building 7 going down, and you could see it. It was in the background; it was still up. So, so there's a lot of fishy stuff with that. But Daniel Noel is a really intelligent guy, and he's a great guy too. I noticed that, he was one of the guys that, as you said, came to the Flat Earth dinner meetup, and he was having some great, I wouldn't say heated, but I would say intense.
I would say heated. I would say heated.
Okay. Yeah. But I thought he was fair. He was assertive, but he wasn't like the typical, intelligent, highly educated guy that would speak with someone who was a flat earther. He wasn't condescending. He wasn't holier than thou. He just made some assertive points. He asked questions, So I thought he's open, to considering things. And I think it was it Jay Rovita that he was talking with? But, Jay is a wealth of information, and he was just going off, and the two of them were at one end of the table.
I know.
And I was like, man, this is like a meeting of the minds happening at the end of this table. And I wondered what the folks at the table behind us were thinking, because they were really getting an education. But, most people probably don't know this, but if you listen to him, you can tell he has a strong accent, although he's very articulate in his English. He's originally from Belgium, I believe. And, but he's been a native Californian for like the last 25 years. So he's lived in Southern California for a couple of decades. And he was joking around with me when we had our luncheon, on the first day. He was joking around with me that he told some of his colleagues, that he was going to this conference. And of course, what's that conference about? And what are some of the other topics? And I guess it came out that, Flat Earth was one of the subjects. And he says, I'm catching all kinds of flack right now.
I'm sure.
But he's a good guy. He's a good sport, very intelligent. I thought the parts that I saw of his presentation, he was just right on. And I'm looking forward to getting the download and watching that over again, this time in its complete form. But yeah, he's a unique guy, and I think it was really smart that Joe put him in the lineup, because this is a topic that a lot of people are talking about. And he even noticed that Nathan Thompson had his Building 7 T-shirt on. He's like, yeah.
He's like, where did he get that? He actually took a picture of it. He wanted to get one. He's like, that is cool. Yeah, he liked it. So many people think it was like 7-Eleven, right? But it's like Building 7. So it's a really great conversational piece, which if we have time, we'll get into the conversations we had when we went to downtown Disney I believe on the Sunday is when we went there. But and then, I mean, obviously, right afterwards, we had Paul on the plane with Scott Henderson getting into, did we really go to the moon? And again, that is so crucial when it comes to especially the topic of flat Earth or, some of these conspiracies, because, if they didn't go to the moon, why would they lie, and how far can we actually go, right? It really comes down to those two things. So it was great that was brought up as well with Question Everything 2019. And, Paul, it's great. We did interview early that morning with Paul. And I mean, he was just right on the money, man. He could definitely talk about, everything to do with the moon, but also, a lot of engineering, scientific facts when it comes into, basically the topic of flat Earth, and, for an educated guy, for him to be able to articulate it in that manner, I think it's good for a lot of people to hear, because they're like, okay, this guy is not some crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
He's making a lot of sense, and I'm going to research this. I want to look into this. But, getting into the moon, I thought that was really, really extraordinary. I'm a big believer in allowing people to really look into, did we land on the moon? What did you get from that presentation?
Yeah, I have not had the privilege of listening to Scott Henderson before. I've heard of him, but I thought it was a really good, 1-2 punch there with both Paul and Scott, because they're both so very knowledgeable, and you could tell they work well together. They're on the same page as far as, how they go about their research. And they had a lot of pictures and pictures of the, land rover, moon rover, and they were showing, several different pictures and showing how in a lot of these Apollo missions that, they say it was a different rover, or say it was the same rover, but there was all these different like patch jobs and things. They zoomed in and they were showing different, patches on this fender and whatever else. And basically he's saying, they were recycling the same stuff. They just they kept having to patch it up, because it was just basically a vehicle chassis with a couple of things, welded on it. And even on the lander, the module, they were talking about, one picture, you had all these components, and there was this one large condenser unit on one side of it, and then all of a sudden that was gone. And that's because, they had to fit some other stuff there that they couldn't fit with that big old condenser on the one side of it. I mean, I was very impressed. And I'll be honest, a lot of this engineering and technical stuff is hard for me to follow along with. But I thought they did a fantastic job. And again, with the visuals, when you can show comparison photos, and even I thought it was hilarious. They showed certain rocks, that were obviously movie props because they had lettering and numbers on them. This is rock number C. I just was like, wow, I can't believe that stuff, man.
It's so blatant. It's so blatant when you get into the moon landing. If you actually take the time and look into it, there's just a mountain of evidence. I mean, in the same regard, 9/11. If you research that, there's just so much evidence. And the same thing with the moon landing, like how anyone can actually believe that we landed on the moon in the 1960s and 70s is beyond me. If you take the time to really look into the information that's presented, right, by a lot of really good researchers. And I mean, the stuff's right there. It's so blatant. I don't think they really knew that, 50 years later, all these people would be like dissecting all this footage. But when you have crosshairs, behind stuff, that just doesn't happen in photography, right? When you don't have, craters, you don't have all these sort of things as far as the lunar lander and all this. And just the idea of like not one, I mean, just from a logistical standpoint, not one technical issue, no problem. I mean, blasting off something and attaching to something else and then coming back to Earth. I mean, the logistics behind that are insane. But yet, wait a minute, wasn't China just on the other side of the moon, And they're talking now, there's more. I mean, literally, you could like find an article every day about the nonsense they're putting out there, and people just eat it up, right? SpaceX just did a launch and all this sort of thing. And I know that Paul on the Plane does a lot of work, with his, his shows on Truth Frequency Radio, Dome Life. And, he has some really great guests. He's done some awesome series on Space is Fake. Check out his channel on YouTube. But there's a lot of great information that he's presented, and he's been a huge asset in the flat Earth community, with all the different personalities and stuff. He's been a very stable voice, and I think people recognize that. I know he'll be speaking not just in Dallas at my conference, the Flat Earth International Conference in Dallas, but also I believe he's going to be in the UK and he'll be at other conferences this year. So that's really exciting. Well, let's move along because, again, we've still got quite a few speakers to go. We're into actually, I think it got changed around. Didn't Chad go before Mark, or was Mark next up? Like, I know the schedule had Mark up next, but I'm pretty sure
there was a swap. I think they had Woketown.
That's right. That's right.
Have
that was right.
Woketown go?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. Yes, which was Matt and Jessica Long.
Yeah.
And they did a presentation. Maybe you can comment a little bit about what the newlyweds put together for Question Everything 2019.
Yeah, it was cool because they were sharing about how, we've only been married for like a month and a half, but we have this podcast together now. And of course, most of you that followed Matt before, Matt Long, he had Flatworth was his original YouTube channel. And I think he had like couple thousand subscribers on that, and it was just growing and growing. And when they got married in January and he moved to Canada, they wanted to do this together. They wanted to be able to share, both being truthers, and Jessica comes from a big, truther, flat earther family. So it was kind of a nice match there, with their interests and their backgrounds. And so then they decided to basically begin a podcast through their new YouTube channel called Woketown. And they've had a couple of podcasts. I think their first one, they shared about how they met.
Correct.
And, different relationship struggles that they both had before, and how they came together and made plans to get married and everything. And so I remember listening to the first podcast. So they basically did sort of a podcast live, along that format. And it was very interesting. And, Matt shared about his Antarctica, video that he did there in Grand Prairie, a few weeks ago, when it was, at least one day, it was the coldest place on Earth. It was
actually colder than Antarctica. That day that he filmed it was actually colder than Antarctica.
Yeah, exactly. It was 48 below zero or something. It was very close to 50 below. But so, obviously it's a spoof. It's funny. He's got a series of videos, and he put his final one out just, I think, yesterday or something like that.
A couple days ago, yeah.
Yeah, a couple days ago. But, they're a fun couple. They have a lot of fun together, and it was cool that they could, be together. And I think this was Jessica's first time to speak. She had been there for the awards at FEIC 18 and helped with some things, but it was cool for a cool experience for her. And so, there was that one little schedule change, and I think that they ended up having to leave a little bit early for some travel.
That's right. They were meeting up with Matt's parents in Palm Springs, so they had to leave early, and I think that's why Joe had moved some stuff around. But yeah, it was great seeing them with their presentation. I was able to actually catch that. And it was really cool, too, because Jessica, well, even Matt were, really impressed in the sense that normally when I'm doing the Flat Earth International conferences, I've got my conference organizer hat on. So they're not seeing me give a presentation. Matt just recently messaged me, and he said, that's the most passionate I think I've ever seen you. So cool. He really enjoyed it. And, Matt always gives a great presentation speech. He did. It was interesting, too, because his first opportunity was me bringing him to Canada to speak for the very first time. And so it was really cool because I had met Matt for the very first time at a conference that John Gabrielson put on in Austin, Texas, which was Back to the Future. And it's just interesting how, Matt has been pretty much with me ever since I gave my very first presentation speaking in Austin. Like I said, it's just interesting how things happen, how they come together. And then not to mention that he meets, Jessica at the conference that I put on that he was speaking at, and that sort of thing. So it's just interesting how everything kind of comes together that way. Yeah. It's pretty wild. So so they basically took off to Palm Springs, and I think Mark was up next because Chad was after Mark. That's right. So maybe we could talk a little bit about Mark Sargent. And if people aren't familiar, he's the one that did Flat Earth Clues. If you haven't seen Flat Earth Clues, check it out, because most of us, including myself, it was the second video I came across, and it was almost like The Plain Truth or Loose Change. When I watched this documentary on 9/11, I was forever changed. For me, Flat Earth Clues was connecting all these dots, and it was hard to ignore all the evidence. I had to go further. So he's influenced and he's affected a lot of people with his work back in 2015 with Flat Earth Clues. But maybe you can comment a little bit about Mark Sargent and what he kind of went through, and what people could expect if they want to get the digital download that's available right now on QE2019.com. I guess the pre-order, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. In a nutshell, there was really two main sections, and he talked about kind of the history of Flat Earth really beginning, as it picked up steam in 2014. He spoke about some of the major, players in that. And, he did he's been in this for a long time, as you have. So, he's a good person to speak on these things, and he's done a lot of radio interviews with a lot of these folks. And of course, at the beginning, you had a few folks whose names were coming up a lot, like Eric DeBay and Matt Powerland, which I think is Matt Boylan. Anyway, I guess those are the same dudes. But it was funny because he mentioned how some people try to claim that they originated it. Matt Powerland was talking about how, man, I started this thing, and and Mark was saying how people would say, oh, you're the face of Flat Earth, or you're kind of the ringleader. But he's like, look, I don't consider myself that. And he said, I don't consider myself, a celebrity, but he's like, people do know me because of the, Flat Earth Clues and other elements of his radio show. And so he kind of spoke about the beginnings of that. And then he finished up talking about, where we're at now and where we're going. And he was real clear in sharing that in 2018, there was another big surge. And now he highlighted, look how many conferences there are. I mean, obviously, the Flat Earth International Conference that you put on is the biggest conference. But now just about every region around has conferences, and there's at least a couple of them overseas as well. And now there's going to be one that you'll be speaking at in person in New Zealand in April, and just all these other little kind of startup conferences, first year conferences. He's like, man, 2018 added several more, but he was saying how he believed 2019 is just going to continue in that process. And he seemed excited about it. He seemed, hey, this is a good thing, because just like Question Everything, that's a brand new conference. And I know Joe Garcia and Elisa are going to have to think it through on, hey, we're going to do another one. I think it was a success. I hope they do another one. But as you know, they need a few weeks of rest. You're not
you can't think about it right after a conference. I'm the only crazy one that actually announces my next year conference at the last day of the current conference. Nice, I'm like, and now I did it in Raleigh, and I did it in Denver. I seem to do it that way. But you have to kind of reflect on it and decide. Like I said, it's not a small task at all. It's a lot of work. But I know for Joe and his wife, I mean, it's rewarding, and really, if one person's life is changed, I mean, it's all worth it. I always say that, right? If one person, their life has changed, it's all worth it. It's not even about numbers. It's really, truly about answering to what God is calling you to do, especially in their case. And in my case, that's exactly why God called me to do what I'm doing. I wouldn't even be doing this topic if it wasn't for, choosing me. I definitely didn't choose it. Right. So I know that Joe and his wife will, reflect and decide if they want to do it again. But he definitely will understand, how much work it is, and and definitely feel the appreciation, obviously from the speakers, and he'll get some good feedback, from the people that are there. But I'm sure, it touched a lot of people, and he'll be hearing about it. Not to mention with people that get the digital download, that they basically are getting, edified. They're getting a lot of food. As far as everything that was presented, right? Because again, that stuff is priceless as far as the information, and it's timeless. It really is. I mean, like I said, with these presentations, you could be saying the same thing, 10 years from now, and they'll still apply, right? So Mark's great. Like I said, he's been known Mark for a long time within the Flat Earth community, and like I said, I'm very happy that he's kind of out there, with the media and being presented, just because he's all around just a very genuine guy. I mean, he comes under a lot of attack. A lot of people are suspicious of him, but again, I can definitely vouch for the guy and say that he's a great guy, and he's definitely an asset to the community. He definitely doesn't hinder it, and he's not trying to hurt it. He's only trying to build it up. So
and he's been a workhorse, man. I mean,
he's the hardest worker. That was the quote they got from me in Behind the Curve on Netflix. When we're introducing Mark Sargent, a bunch of people are talking about flat earth clues. But the clip they got from me in the movie on Netflix, and if you haven't seen it, check it out. I say, I hear a lot of things about Mark Sargent, but what I can say is he's one of the hardest workers in flat earth, and it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, he will promote your conference. He will put up he just is an incredibly hard worker for this. I mean, he lives and breathes flat earth, and he's truly committed to the cause 110%. So people might not like his approach, but again, his heart's in the right place.
Amen.
So I'm a big believer, and I definitely will stand firm and even defend Mark, because I've got to know him very well. After the conference in Canada, I took him and a bunch of the speakers out to the mountains, and we stayed at a house for a few days in the mountains, and we just all we were cooking dinner, having dinner. It was like real world, flat earth real world. It was like a reality show. It was the weirdest thing because we were in an environment where it was just Rob Skiba, Bob Nodell, Cammie, Matt Long was there, Rick Hummer. There was all these speakers, and we were just sitting in a house, having dinner. We're just being like normal people, and we didn't have all these other influences around us, right? So we were able to really get to know each other and talk not just about the community and what we see, in the future, but we were able to be candid and honest with one another. And you could just tell that everyone, especially the people I bring out to my conferences, and they stay with me long term, they're the real deal. There's a reason why, these have been staples through my conferences that I put on, and many people are recognizing the same thing. So, and then we're getting into Chad Taylor that came in afterwards, and he talked about what does the Bible say about Earth. And Chad, we had him on a show, I think it was episode 7. I think we had Chad on, and he's an author of Where Are We? Earth According to the Bible, and we got into a lot of different things. So check out that episode. If you're not a supporter of Revolution Radio, make sure it's like little as $6 a month. You get access to all the archives, not just with Celebrate Truth Radio, but every single archive of every show on Revolution Radio. And it's a great way to support them to keep it going, because like I said, there's no censorship. We're allowed to say what we want to say, and we don't have to worry about being shut down. So please support them if you can, because like I said, they're doing a great thing with all of their all of their hosts and all of their programs. So let's get into Chad Taylor, because obviously not only we got to know Chad really well, but you were his roomie for the weekend at Question Everything 2019. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about Chad.
Yeah, Chad Taylor is one of the most genuine people that I know on Flat Earth, and he kind of sneaks. Hey, no, I said what?
I know. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
He's just that all around friendly guy. He's not pretentious, and he does care about the individual people that he meets. And he was one of the great listeners who allowed me to kind of bend their ear at Take on the World 8 team before I got fired, from the church for going to this conference. And so I've had a long time, friendship relationship with him. And this is the second time we've been roommates, because we roomed together at your conference in Denver, FEIC 18. And so we've gotten to know each other pretty well. And he shared at the conference, going all the way back to, I think, 2009, was when, he hiked up into the mountains of Montana and was doing some, kind of some soul searching as it related to the Bible and where to start. And specifically, he landed in Genesis chapter 1 and decided to really, mull over some items about the creation, specifically the firmament. And so I like how he shared at the beginning of this presentation kind of the backstory to how he got into this, this study. And he did a couple of years of, thinking about it, praying about it, researching on it. And it took a while for him to get his book, to the final product. But as I say, I always like to call it a resource. It's not just a book, because the way he has it outlined is he shares 4 translations of Scripture on every page that he discusses, looking at, what does the Bible actually say about where we live, and of course he does begin in Genesis chapter 1, and and where it all started biblically. But he goes through a lot of subjects, and he also was able to share in his presentation and his PowerPoint several of the illustrations that he created himself through a particular program. And it was a lot of extra hours of work for him. But I'm really glad personally that he included that visual, because, as I said, not only do you get into the scripture, but you can look at some basic visuals to kind of illustrate what the scriptures are saying. And so Chad did a fantastic job as usual. And I've heard his presentation probably three, 4 times now at various conferences. But he has so much wealth of information and different items that he can share, about the throne of God and about how up is up and down is down in the scriptures. He talks about, the sun and the moon and the stars and just all kinds of subjects. So he could probably do, 10 lessons in a series on material from his book. But Chad's a great all-around guy. Consider him not only a brother, but a close friend. And I'm thankful that he was able to come out to Question Everything. I know there was a lot of people that were excited to meet him in person. And, he always sells out of books, and he gives books away. He has a drawing for free books at every conference that he's at. So he's also a very giving individual as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chad's a great guy, down to earth. And honestly, he's just so solid when it comes to his research and just really defending what the Bible has to say about the reality of creation. And his book is a tremendous resource. I mean, I always say, homeschooling, it's ideal, but anyone, can get a lot of a great valuable input. And he breaks it down in an incredible way, that's for sure. But I would say that, as more people get to know of his work, I can see him definitely excelling and rapidly growing, in the flat earth, community, just because he's just, he's like one of those guys that's just like, you can't find anything wrong with him. You know what I mean? Yeah. But
I'll tell you what's wrong with Chad Taylor. He's just too nice of a guy.
Yeah, that's one of those too nice of a guy. But then as Jared pointed out, we found out that he used to be into some pretty heavy hard rock music, and he's
a metalhead, man. He loves his heavy metal.
He loves his heavy metal. We were joking around saying that we were going to see if Joe would allow him to bring some skinny pants and the skinny jeans, and maybe perform a riff on stage, but that never came to fruition. So maybe we'll see if we can get that done for FE 2019 in Dallas. I don't know if he'll be up for it, but have a concert portion, and we'll go through there. So let's get into the last part, because we're closing down here the second hour. We've got about 15 minutes. Let's get into the finale, which I thought was pretty powerful, getting into Jared Kretzmann, the Q&A panel with all the speakers, and then also the surprise speaker that was announced at the conference. So maybe you want to start with Jared Kretzmann. Is there a battle for our minds, is what he talked about.
Jared is a great speaker. I love listening to him. Again, he was very passionate about this topic. He made the connection to say that, our minds are connected to our soul, and the things that we think about, the things, are the actions that we do flow out of, where is our mindset, and our mindset about not only the world around us, but specifically, he talked about, our relationship with God and circumstances in our lives that can lead us, towards the truth of God. And so I liked how he connected that and impressed upon us that, the minds, our minds are so important in that quest, for spiritual knowledge. And if I remember right, he shared a big block of scripture from Ephesians chapter 1, talking about the spiritual blessings that are in Christ. And he kind of echoed some of what you shared and other speakers shared about, there's so many different neat truths out there and deep truths that we can learn and insights, and even talked about, hey, I love talking about the Nazis and doing all this research into the occult. But he really impressed upon, and in not only a powerful way, but just a very straightforward. And I thought he was pretty bold. He basically said, if you don't have a relationship with God, if you don't understand, Jesus, your creator, that needs to be the top on your list. Like, don't leave here and not consider the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I thought it was great. And actually, since we were doing the radio show last week, really live from Question Everything, the way that the schedule worked out, we got all or most, or if not all, of Jared's talk in the first hour of the show, and then the second hour we got the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Right into the panel with all the speakers, and that was great to have. All the way that Joe had laid that out with the app. I thought that was really cool. I'm going to probably use that for the Flat Earth International Conference, because it's a great way to not only have all the speakers addressed, but it's just a very concise and organized way of doing it as well too, right?
Yeah, it was very smooth. I think it was Slido.com.
I believe so. Yeah, it was like an app that you could kind of submit all these questions for the different speakers, and then everyone had it. I actually joked with a couple speakers. I joked with Jared, because Jared was sitting right beside me, Jared Kretzmann, and I said, "When did I become an expert on YouTube?" He's like, he goes, when you got to 100, when you got over 100,000 subscribers, and he said, "When did I become a Nazi expert?"
Nice.
He's like, I'm like a World War II expert, so because all the questions. But I would imagine that the majority of people, submitted the questions right on the first day, right? And I think a lot of them were picked in there. But still, it was a great way of getting the questions, because they're specific and everyone gets a chance.
Yeah.
The problem is when you just have a free for all, it's like some people aren't getting, they're just sitting there, right? So
it was a very smooth, like you said, very smooth process. The organization was great. And like you said, it's a pretty unique panel, right? Because we get a lot of great like flat earth panels, right? But one thing that was really cool about this was that there was such a variety of subjects. It was just like a cornucopia, I mean, like you said, probably never had a conference that had quite the variance of important hot button, topics. And so I thought the panel discussion was really great, and I was kind of getting into it. I had to keep paying attention to being able to record on the radio and make sure I wasn't pushing buttons I wasn't supposed to. But it was such a great discussion. I think a lot of people were very pleased with how that all worked out.
Yeah, no, super, super awesome. I'm definitely going to use it. Thanks, Joe, for the idea. But that's the nice thing. When you go to different conferences, you can learn from different conferences. And I'm happy that Joe and his wife are going to be coming out to Dallas to my conference. And definitely it's going to be great to have them come out, because I think Joe was thinking last year he was wanting to come out to Denver. It didn't work out. And I said, well, there's no excuse. You and your wife have to come out, be my guests. And enjoy yourself. And I know that he will really enjoy himself, because when he's sitting there in that capacity, he'll be like, oh, this is nice. Because when you're organizing it, it's just like, oh my goodness, it's like
he'll get to watch you run around like a chicken with your head cut off.
which I love, by the way, love, because everyone's like, oh, I feel so sorry for Robbie. And I love it. It's great. I love being on running around and stuff, and just seeing it come together. It's such a satisfying thing when you see just people with smiles on their faces and people coming up to you and like, thank you so much, for putting this on.
Absolutely.
It makes all the, when people drag you through the mud or beat you up or whatever, online, whether it's your motivations or whether you're out for the money or whatever they say, the fact is it makes it all worth it, because you can see the smile on people's face. You can see the look in their eyes, and it's pure joy. It's pure, some people, this is like the highlight of their life. And it's not because, of me, it's just because of everything. It's the community itself. And I always say that that's kind of the real essence of what the community is. And until you come out to a conference or a meetup or something, you never really will know truly how good it is. If you stay online, then you probably are going to get discouraged, because there's a lot of hateful people. There's a lot of people that want to backbite. They want to, gossip. They want to cause division and strife. And, it's really important sometimes to come out and just enjoy all that. So let's get right to the surprise speaker. And that surprise speaker was Nathan Reynolds, which he wrote the book Snatched from the Flames, I believe.
Yeah.
And just a fantastic, fantastic book. And I think a lot of people were really surprised. You and I, we had the opportunity to meet Nathan Reynolds at Take on the World, when I was speaking there. And, I didn't get a huge amount of time to spend with Nathan Reynolds. But after that, we had talked. I had him come out to Denver. He had a table set up. And I knew with his extraordinary story and just the power of God and kind of what, has been done in his life, it would be a very powerful closing. And maybe you can comment a little bit about that, because I know everyone, you could hear a pin drop I remember looking at even Mark Sargent and Patricia Steer. They were like, I think, front row, and they were just glued, and how can you not when he starts telling his story? And hey, this is not just a story. This is real life.
It might have been the quietest that the room was the whole weekend because, like you said, everybody was glued in. And, his presentation was so powerful because he shared about growing up in this high-profile family, this family that utilized, satanic ritual abuse in their generations, and just what he went through and how that pushed him towards, his career in the military. And he makes no bones about it. He says, I was a trained assassin at one point in my life. And, his valuing of life at that time, was very different from what he's like now. It's like he's a totally different person. And he shared about, the most important question is, where will we spend eternity? What's all these other topics are great and interesting and powerful and all that. But he really shared about the redemption through Jesus Christ. And I think, you almost couldn't pick a more powerful speaker who's qualified to share about that redemption, because he was redeemed physically. He was redeemed from a horrible, situation growing up in that family environment. And then he was redeemed, spiritually through Jesus Christ. And anybody who knows him now, you would say, you would read his book and you would say, nah, I know. You. Like, is that real? Like, is that legit? If you didn't know him, you would probably be saying, no way, man. This sounds like some kind of Hollywood, Jason Bourne.
As my wife would say, poppycock.
Poppycock.
Yeah. She's like, no, come on, this is nonsense.
But when you meet the guy and you have a chance to just talk to him and you just see his spirit, his demeanor.
Sure.
And he's a cool guy too. He has a really great sense of humor.
Sure.
He was hanging out with us at that early morning live stream into 3 a.m.
Yeah, and Paul on the plane was there at the beginning, and then he bowed out. I think he was the first one to bow out. It's like, okay, who's going to be wimps and go to bed first? It was Paul on the plane. But
I wish I could have bowed out too. I was getting really tired, but it was so fun. I was like, you know what? You bowed out
the first day. You bowed out the first day on me, and then you bowed out, I think, on the second day. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, I got a hold of you at like 10 at night, and you're already like snoring with.
Me and Chad, we went to bed early both nights, but we had to charge up our batteries because there's no way we would have survived, the 3 a.m. But and Nathan Reynolds also, he was the coffee supplier for the whole conference, which was really cool.
Great.
And Organo coffee. I tried some and I was blown away for an instant coffee. I thought, man, it's really great. But I ended up bringing a box of that home, and that made it through the airport as well.
Well, we're gonna have Nathan Reynolds on soon. I already talked to him about that. I also had mentioned it to Paul on the plane. We're gonna definitely have him on the show. Like I said, we've had some really great guests, but continuing on, especially from Question Everything, it only makes sense to have these guys on there and talk more. Another person we haven't had on is Jared Kretzmann. We'll get him on a future episode. So there's just so many people. I mean, the cool thing, I was able to have Matt Long on when he was at my house, when him and Jessica came over. I think it was a couple of weeks before the conference, they came over, and it was neat to be able to do, that was the second guest that I've been able to do in person.
Yeah.
The first one was my friend Jonathan that, was coming from a skeptical, point of view, not a flat earther, but, really huge supporter of my work. He's always bought, things that I've come out with, whether it's a DVD or book, but he's been a huge support, even though he doesn't believe in it 100%, but he does not believe they went to the moon. So we laughed. Remember that episode? We're like, it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time before he becomes a flat earther, because he doesn't believe they landed on the moon. But we're going to have some really great guests coming up. But let's conclude. Let's talk a little bit more about Nathan Reynolds and the closing speech. And I believe it was the biggest question of them all.
Yeah. Yeah, I really thought that Jared and Nathan Reynolds really just tied it up well. And like you said, every person there was glued to that, talking about, eternity, talking about the relationship with Jesus Christ and the power of the gospel to transform our lives and to redeem, those who thought themselves they were unredeemable. And so that was certainly a highlight. And I thought it was powerful to start off so well, speaking about the Bible and, and its reliability and all the great speakers in between, and kind of wrapping it up with the bookends there of just two powerful lessons in a row. It exceeded my hope and expectations.
It was two gospel presentations. It wasn't just one gospel. It was two. It was like bang, bang.
Really two, and from different angles, but both connecting, on the same foundational points. And so I was blown away. I was like, man, what a great ending.
So good
to that conference.
So good. Like I said, it's amazing that we were able to connect with so many great speakers that really their desire in their heart is for the gospel and is for the truth of Jesus, right? Being the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6. And I love that, and it was really great to get to talk with Paul more and find out his love and his heart for not just the Bible, but for Jesus and the truth, right? And everyone involved in Question Everything was all really about, pushing that truth forward. But really when it came down to it is understanding the most important truth of all. And, that is Jesus, and that he provided the way to make it truly available for any one of us that truly calls on the name. And his name is a name above all names. So this was episode 9. Thank you so much, everyone. We were doing the recap of Question Everything 2019. Stay tuned. Next Saturday, we're going to have another great guest coming on. We'll let you know soon. But blessings to y'all. Have a good night.
Care.
Don't miss Celebrate Truth with Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate every Saturday, 7 to 9 Pacific, 10 to midnight Eastern on Revolution Radio. They talk the Bible and how it exposes a lot of lies in the world with special guests, roundtable discussions, and call-ins from you, the listeners. This is not your typical Christian radio show. Celebrate Truth with Robbie Davidson and Pastor Nate every Saturday from 7 till 9 p.m. Pacific, 10 midnight Eastern on Revolution Radio.